Pedro Rodrigues, born in 1954 on a farm in Santa Rita de Sapucaí, Brazil, gained popularity as one of Brazil's most infamous serial killers. His story was so unique that it even inspired a TV series called Dexter. It all started with his violent father, who did not consider the consequences of his actions. As a result, Pedro experienced violence even before he was born. There was a time when Pedro's father kicked his mother in her abdomen, causing a slight deformation in Pedro's skull. This incident led to brain disorders in areas associated with empathy and reactions, which would significantly impact his behavior. Pedro grew up with his sister in a difficult childhood with constant attacks and insults from their father. As the years went by, his delayed behavior became more evident. He developed a predisposition to violence and started associating fun with cruelty and aggression. At a young age, he worked in a poultry slaughterhouse, which brought him immense satisfaction in killing animals. However, it wasn't until the age of 13 that Pedro felt the urge to kill a person. This desire arose after a fight with his cousin, during which Pedro lost control and viciously attacked him. In the heat of the moment, Pedro experienced an uncontrollable fury and pleasure in inflicting pain. He even attempted to push his cousin towards a sugarcane dam, intending to dispose of him. People witnessing the fight had to intervene to prevent a killing, as Pedro was so euphoric and consumed by his desire to end his cousin's life. It became evident to Pedro that something was wrong with him. He recognized the unsettling need within him to take someone's life. Impulses consumed Pedro, and his desire for violence became overwhelming. Anyone who provoked or assaulted him would face the full force of his rage without any consideration for who they were. He resolved conflicts with violent blows, but his intentions didn't stop there. Pedro always harbored the desire to end the life of his enemies. Within just a year of the incident with his cousin, when Pedro was only 14 years old, he found the perfect outlet to channel his anger and frustration. The catalyst for his descent into a life of crime came after the vice mayor of Alfenas accused Pedro's father of stealing breakfast funds from the school where he worked as a security guard. Pedro understood that if his father were fired, it would mean economic instability and further violence in their home. Fearing these consequences, Pedro made the chilling decision to end the life of the vice mayor. A few days later, Pedro's father was indeed fired, prompting Pedro to acquire a sawed-off shotgun. He stormed into the town hall where the vice mayor was located and ruthlessly shot him. After committing the act, Pedro swiftly fled to avoid being seen. Despite the immediate police response, Pedro had managed to escape. In a surprising turn of events, just a few days later, Pedro discovered that the true thief responsible for the stolen funds was the other security guard who worked alongside his father. Filled with a sense of injustice and a desire for revenge, Pedro set his sights on the school and confronted the guard. After an exchange of words, he shot him and fled the scene after being witnessed by multiple people. Following this event, Pedro fled to the criminal underworld, seeking refuge in the dangerous favelas of São Paulo. In São Paulo's treacherous streets, Pedro resorted to surviving by robbing criminals on the street. It was during this time that he crossed paths with an organization involved in the drug trade. Within their ranks, Pedro encountered a woman named Maria Olympias, the widow of a deceased leader within the organization. Maria became Pedro's partner, and as the widow, Pedro was compelled to assume the responsibilities that had belonged to Maria's late husband. At this stage of Pedro's life, it seemed that everything had changed. He had a stable relationship with Maria, who was now his fiancée, and they deeply loved each other. Pedro continued eliminating people, driven by his dark urges. However, everything took a turn when his reputation for killing his rivals and a fierce dispute with gang members led them to reveal the location of Maria's house to the police. In an act of revenge, they brutally killed Maria, who was also pregnant with his child, leaving Pedro devastated. Although he managed to escape, he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness, as she had meant everything to him. Despite the loss, Pedro carried on with his life and eventually gathered a group of individuals to establish his own drug operation. Over time, he began to question why the police had targeted Maria. This obsession with revenge consumed him, and he embarked on a relentless search for the person responsible for torturing and killing the love of his life. It did not matter why to him how many people he will have to go through to get to the bottom of it. After an extensive investigation, Pedro finally received the expected answer from an ex-wife of a crime organization leader. She revealed that her ex-husband was the one responsible for the police's involvement in Maria's death. Determined to seek retribution, Pedro decided to bide his time and wait for the perfect opportunity to strike back. Days turned into weeks as Pedro meticulously planned his revenge. Finally, the wedding night of the organization leader arrived, a seemingly joyous event filled with tranquility, music, and dancing. People conversed from their seats while enjoying their food and drinks, and all of a sudden, Pedro appeared with 4 armed friends. Chaos erupted as they unleashed a hail of bullets, causing panic and chaos. People ran and shouted, caught in the crossfire as the exchange of gunfire ensued. Pedro and his accomplices swiftly fled the scene. That fateful day, 7 lives were lost, and an additional 16 individuals were reported to be seriously injured as a result of the violent attack. Shortly after the tragic events, Pedro was confronted with heart-wrenching news that ignited a deep anger within him. He learned that his father stabbed his mother to death. Fueled by an overwhelming sense of hatred, Pedro confronted his father and engaged in a violent confrontation, ending his father's life. The gruesome act drew significant attention, and the Brazilian police launched a relentless search for the person responsible. Pedro, being the prime suspect, was only 19 years old at the time, yet he had already taken the lives of numerous individuals. On May 27, 1973, Pedro was apprehended and transported to a prison in Sao Paulo, accompanied by another criminal. When the doors of the truck were opened, the authorities were left speechless. The other criminal was lifeless, having met his demise during the journey. When questioned about what had happened, Pedro calmly explained that the deceased criminal had a history of abusing women, which had driven Pedro to take his life. As if destiny had turned against him, Pedro received another devastating blow. He learned that his sister had also lost her life. It seemed that a cruel fate was working against him. In the eyes of the law, Pedro was found guilty of multiple murders, resulting in an initial sentence of 126 years in prison. Despite the gravity of his crimes, Pedro's final sentence was increased to 400 years. However, as per Brazilian law at the time, the maximum sentence for imprisonment was 30 years. Once inside the prison, far from being rehabilitated, Pedro continued with his reign of violence. Constant fights with fellow inmates and clashes with guards resulted in Pedro taking the lives of 47 more individuals. In total, he became responsible for the deaths of about 100 victims, showing no mercy or remorse. The guards assigned to watch over him noticed that Pedro maintained a rigorous exercise routine, which resulted in tremendous physical strength. They recounted an incident where he was surrounded by 5 inmates who attempted to attack him, but Pedro fought back, leaving 3 dead and 2 seriously injured. His reputation as an unstoppable force in hand-to-hand combat was solidified. With his imposing physique and full of tattoos, Pedro constantly exhibited a predisposition for violence, making him a terrifying threat to others. Efforts were made to isolate Pedro from the general prison population, but they proved unsuccessful in the long term. Other inmates struggled to keep their distance from him. Eventually, Pedro became known as the Matador. He even had a tattoo on his body bearing the phrase, "I kill for pleasure." Ironically, the man who killed his sister ended up in the same prison. They became friends. However, when Pedro discovered that his friend had confessed to being responsible for his sister's death, he did not hesitate to kill him. Despite his 400-year sentence, discussions arose in 2003 regarding Pedro's potential release, due to a law that prohibited individuals from being imprisoned for more than 30 years. However, during his 30-year stay in prison, 47 prisoners died thanks to him, which led to a 4-year extension of his sentence. On April 24, 2007, Pedro was granted his freedom. Upon release, Pedro found work as a watchman and gained significant notoriety. He brought down a notorious serial killer known as the Maniac Park Killer, who had taken the lives of several people. This garnered attention and further added to Pedro's reputation in society. In 2011, he was arrested again for illegal possession of firearms and participation in riots. He was released in 2018. He has his own YouTube channel where he talks about his crimes and also warned young people against the life of crime. On March 5, 2023, his luck ran out and he was shot dead near Sao Paulo. He was 68 years old. Do you think he was a menace to society or a vigilante? Please let us know in the comments section. Till next time.